Dawn on the Pacific, 1944. The sea is calm, but tension crackles in the air like static before a storm. On the horizon, the colossal silhouette of a Japanese battleship cuts through the mist, steel glinting under a rising sun. For years, vessels like this had ruled the ocean through sheer mass and firepower, their captains confident that no Allied gun could breach their armor. Then a distant boom. A single shell arcs across the sky, silent at first. Seconds later, a thunderous detonation. Steel buckles. Water erupts. The pride of the Imperial Navy suddenly feels mortal. What the Japanese didn't know, what no one could have predicted, was that American engineers had just rewritten the laws of naval warfare. Not with a new ship, not with a revolutionary radar, but with a single shell. A bullet so devastating, so precisely engineered, that it turned the world's mightiest battleships into floating coffins. This is the story of the Mark 8 APC Super Heavy Armor-Piercing Round, the secret weapon that shattered Japanese naval supremacy and changed the Pacific War forever. If you love stories hidden behind history's headlines, hit subscribe so you never miss what comes next. To understand this revolution, you must first understand the nightmare the Allies faced. By 1942, the Imperial Japanese Navy was the most formidable naval force in the Pacific. Their battleships, Yamato, Musashi, Nagato, were floating fortresses. Yamato alone displaced over 72,000 tons, her armor belt thicker than any ship afloat. Her main guns fired shells weighing 3,200 pounds. She was designed to be unsinkable. American naval planners stared at intelligence reports in grim silence. Standard armor-piercing shells simply bounced off these steel leviathans. Even direct hits from 14-in guns barely scratched Japanese capital ships. Naval doctrine had always held a simple truth: bigger armor wins. And Japan had built the biggest. But in the quiet laboratories of the United States Naval Gun Factory in Washington, D.C., a different kind of war was being fought. Metallurgists, engineers, and ballistics experts worked in secrecy, testing alloys, calculating trajectories, studying the physics of penetration. They weren't trying to build a bigger ship. They were trying to build a smarter bullet. The Iowa-class battleships, already under construction with their massive 16-in guns, would provide the delivery system, but the payload needed to be revolutionary. It needed to ignore armor, to plunge through steel like a knife through silk. The breakthrough came from understanding failure. Every armor-piercing shell that shattered against Japanese battleships told a story. Engineers dissected each failed penetration, each ricochet, each premature detonation. They learned that conventional shells exploded too early on impact with the outer armor, wasting their energy before reaching vital areas. They learned that lighter shells, no matter how fast, lacked the momentum to punch through multiple layers of protection. The solution required rethinking everything. The new Mark 8 APC shell would be a monster. 2,700 pounds of precisely engineered lethality. But weight alone wasn't enough. The shell's body was forged from a special high-carbon steel alloy, heat-treated to achieve unprecedented hardness without brittleness. Its nose was carefully shaped, not too sharp, not too blunt to bite into armor at the optimal angle. But the true genius lay in the fuse. Unlike conventional shells that exploded on contact, the Mark 8 incorporated a delayed action fuse that would only detonate after penetration. The shell would punch through the outer armor belt, continue through the ship's interior, and only then deep inside the hull below the waterline where no armor could protect would explode. The result would be catastrophic. Internal flooding, magazine detonations, structural collapse from within. Testing began in the summer of 1943 at the Naval Proving Ground in Dahlgren, Virginia. Engineers constructed massive armor plates, exact replicas of Japanese battleship protection, and mounted them on specialized frames. The 16-in guns of the Iowa-class battleships were still being installed on their ships, so tests used equivalent naval rifles in controlled conditions. The first shots were failures. Shells shattered. Others failed to penetrate deeply enough. The metallurgy was adjusted. Fuse timing was recalibrated. Propellant charges were modified to achieve the precise muzzle velocity needed. Not too fast, which would cause the shell to break up. Not too slow, which would rob it of penetrating power. Then, on a gray morning in October 1943, everything aligned. A Mark 8 shell was loaded. The gun fired, 22 miles downrange. The projectile struck a 16-in armor plate at an angle simulating a long-range naval engagement. The shell punched through, continued through backing plates, detonated exactly as designed, deep behind the armor. The explosive force contained and directed by the delayed penetration created devastation that made observers go silent. American naval strategists realized they were holding a weapon that could kill any ship afloat. Now they just needed an opportunity to prove it in combat. By early 1944, 4 Iowa-class battleships, Iowa, New Jersey, Missouri, and Wisconsin, were operational in the Pacific. Each mounted 9 16-inch 50 caliber Mark 7 guns capable of firing the new Mark 8 shells. The rounds were produced in limited quantities initially, classified as top secret. Captains received sealed orders. Use conventional ammunition for shore bombardment and smaller targets. Reserve the Mark 8 APC rounds exclusively for enemy capital ships. The strategic situation was shifting after devastating losses at Midway and the Solomon Islands. Japan's carrier force was crippled, but their battleship fleet remained intact, a sword of Damocles hanging over every American naval operation. Intelligence indicated that Yamamoto and Musashi were being held in reserve for a decisive surface engagement, the final apocalyptic showdown that Japanese naval doctrine demanded. American planners knew that encounter was coming. As the U.S. pushed westward, Tarawa, Kwajalein, Saipan, each operation brought the fleets closer to collision. The question wasn't if the battleships would meet, but when. And when they did, the Mark 8 shells would need to perform exactly as designed. There would be no second chances, no room for failure. In naval combat, the first salvo often decided everything. The Pacific theater was about to become a proving ground for a weapon that existed only on paper and in controlled tests. The Battle of the Philippine Sea in June 1944 should have been the moment. American carriers devastated Japanese air power in what pilots called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. But Japanese battleships stayed out of range, refusing surface engagement. American commanders felt frustration mount. The Iowa-class battleships had their new shells, loaded and ready, but without targets. The secret weapon remained untested. Then came October 1944. The Philippines, Late Gulf. The largest naval battle in history was about to unfold, and Japanese Admiral Tako Kurita was bringing everything. Yamato, Musashi, Nagato, Kongo, the mightiest surface fleet Japan could muster. The plan was audacious. To break through American defenses and destroy the vulnerable invasion fleet anchored at Lake Gulf. If successful, it could change the course of the war. American intelligence tracked the Japanese fleet as it approached through the Sibuan Sea. Admiral William Hawley, commanding the Third Fleet, made a fateful decision. Rather than position his battleships for a surface engagement, he prioritized carrier airstrikes. Waves of American aircraft swarmed Musashi on October 24, hitting her with torpedoes and bombs for hours. She finally sank that evening, but not from gunfire, not from the Mark 8 shells. The moment of truth for the secret weapon was still ahead. As night fell on October 24, Admiral Kurita's battered fleet regrouped. Despite Musashi's loss, he still commanded a powerful surface force, including Yamato. American dispositions were confused. Hawley had taken the fast battleships north, chasing Japanese carriers. The invasion fleet at Light Gulf was protected only by light escort carriers and destroyers. Kurita saw opportunity. He pressed through the San Bernardino Strait, heading for what should have been an easy massacre. What happened next has become legend. The Battle of Samar, a desperate, chaotic engagement where outgunned American destroyers and escort carriers fought a delaying action against Japanese battleships. Smoke screens, torpedo runs, suicide charges by ships that had no business fighting battleships. The Americans were buying time, hoping for reinforcements that seemed impossible. But Kurita, rattled by the ferocious resistance and fearing American airstrikes at dawn, made a decision that haunts naval historians. He withdrew. Yamato and the Japanese battleships turned away from Light Gulf just as victory was within reach. The invasion fleet was saved, but once again, the Iowa-class battleships never got their surface engagement. The Mark 8 shells remained unfired in their magazines. Some historians argue Light Gulf proved battleships were obsolete, that carriers and aircraft had rendered surface combat meaningless. but others knew different. The secret was still waiting. What the official histories rarely mention is what happened in the months following Late Gulf. Small-scale engagements, night actions, the grinding advance toward Japan, and in those battles, Iowa-class battleships finally began firing their Mark 8 shells. Not at battleships, but at heavy cruisers, shore installations, and fortified positions. The results were consistently devastating. Reports filtered back to naval intelligence. A Mark 8 shell fired at the heavy cruiser Kumano didn't just penetrate, it passed completely through the ship's citadel before detonating on the far side, breaking her keel. Another engagement saw a single hit on a fortified position, an Iwama punch through 60 feet of reinforced concrete and detonate in the underground magazine. The explosion was so powerful it collapsed an entire hillside. Japanese survivors reported something terrifying. The American shells didn't just hit, they disappeared inside targets before exploding. There was no defense. Armor became a liability, creating confined spaces where the internal detonations caused even more damage. Officers who had once felt secure behind fixed steel plates now understood that the rules had changed. But the true revelation came from something unexpected. Examination of Japanese battleship Nagato after the war. Her armor showed evidence of Mark 8 hits from shore bombardment actions. The penetration patterns shocked even American engineers. The shells had performed better than anyone predicted. The physics were brutal and elegant. When a Mark 8 shell struck armor at optimal angle and velocity, the impact force concentrated on a tiny point, roughly the diameter of the shell's nose. The special steel alloy, harder than the armor it was striking, created a phenomenon called plugging. Rather than shattering or deforming, the shell essentially punched out a circular plug of armor and rode through the hole it created. Once past the outer armor belt, the shell continued through bulkheads, decks, and interior compartments. The delayed fuse, calibrated to withstand the initial impact shock, ticked down. Most shells detonated roughly 33 milliseconds after penetration at depths of 15 to 40 feet inside the target depending on angle and velocity. The explosive charge 40. 9 pounds of explosive D might seem modest compared to the shell's total weight, but positioned deep inside a warship below the waterline, the blast effect was multiplied. Water doesn't compress. When the shell detonated in a compartment, partially or fully flooded, the explosive force had nowhere to go but through the ship's internal structure. Bulkheads ruptured, keel frames buckled. If the shell reached machinery spaces or magazines, secondary explosions followed. Japanese damage control doctrine designed for external damage was helpless against internal detonations. The ship was being destroyed from within where no armor could protect. By early 1945, the secret was starting to leak. Japanese naval officers interrogated after capture spoke in shocked terms about American supershells that penetrated any armor. Intelligence reports mentioned the phenomenon, but couldn't explain it. Japan's naval architects had designed their battleships to withstand the best American shells of 1,940. But this was 1,945 and the Americans had changed the equation. The final chapter of Japan's surface fleet approached. Operation Tengo, the suicide mission of the battleship Yamato in April 1945. Sent with just enough fuel for a one-way trip to Okinawa, she was meant to beat herself and fight as an unsinkable fortress until destroyed. It was desperation disguised as doctrine. American submarines spotted Yamato's task force on April 6th. Carrier aircraft were scrambled. Over 380 planes from multiple carriers. The attack began on April 7 inches, the East China Sea. For 2 hours, waves of dive bombers and torpedo planes swarmed the giant battleship. She took multiple torpedo hits that progressively flooded her port side. Desperate damage control couldn't compensate. Finally, a catastrophic magazine explosion tore her apart. She sank with over 3,000 crew. But Yamato was destroyed by aircraft, by torpedoes and bombs, not by the Mark 8 shells. To the end, the secret weapon never faced its ultimate test in the surface engagement everyone had anticipated. History had moved on. Yet, the revelation isn't in what happened, but in what was proven possible. After the war, American engineers gained access to surviving Japanese battleships, including Nagato, which had survived the war and was being prepared for atomic bomb tests at Bikini Atoll. They examined her armor closely, and what they found stunned them. Multiple impacts from Mark 8 shells showed penetration characteristics that exceeded theoretical calculations. One hit fired from USS Iowa during a shore bombardment where Nagato was anchored nearby had punched through 16 inches of face-hardened armor, continued through 3 inches of structural steel, penetrated a fuel bunker, and detonated inside an ammunition storage room, which fortunately was empty. The total penetration depth was over 40 feet through various layers of protection. Metallurgical analysis revealed why the Japanese armor, while thick, used a different steel composition than American armor. It was optimized to resist shells from Japanese and British naval guns, but the Mark 8 specific alloy and heat treatment created a hardness profile that was accidentally perfectly matched to defeat Japanese armor. It wasn't just good engineering. It was a lucky correspondence of incompatible systems. Had Yamato and Iowa met in surface combat, simulations now suggest the outcome would have been devastatingly one-sided, not because Iowa was better armored or more heavily armed, but because her ammunition rendered Yamato's protection obsolete. The broader revelation came in naval strategy itself. For centuries, naval warfare had been an arms race of thickness versus penetration. Build thicker armor, build bigger guns, build heavier shells. The cycle seemed endless, but the Mark 8 APC shell proved something different. That precision engineering and material science could defeat brute force. Post-war analysis showed that the Mark 8's effectiveness wasn't just about penetration. It was about delayed detonation. Conventional armor-piercing shells that exploded on contact with armor wasted perhaps 70% of their energy, uselessly deforming steel. The Mark 8, by detonating internally, delivered nearly 100% of its explosive force to the target's critical systems. This insight transformed naval design philosophy. If armor could no longer reliably protect against advanced ammunition, why carry heavy armor at all? The paradigm shifted toward speed detection and long-range missile systems. The last true battleship engagement in history, HMS Rodney and King George, 5 destroying Bismarck in 1941, had already occurred before the Mark 8 reached full deployment. By the time the weapon was perfected, the battleship era was ending. The secret shell that could kill any ship arrived too late for the war it was designed to fight, but its legacy ensured no future war would be fought the same way. Perhaps the most haunting revelation comes from the men who loaded these shells. Oral histories from Iowa-class crews describe the ritual of handling Mark 8 ammunition. Each shell was stenkled with manufacturing data, metallurgical specifications, and a warning in red paint. AP special capital targets only. Sailors understood they were handling something extraordinary. Loading crews practiced for the surface engagement that never came. They could load, aim, and fire a full 9-gun broadside from an Iowa-class battleship in under 40 seconds. Each broadside represented over 12 tons of armor-piercing shells flying at 2,500 feet per second. The impact of 9 Mark 8 shells arriving simultaneously on a target would have been apocalyptic, even against Yamato. Some veterans speak with regret that they never got to see their weapon tested in true combat. Others express relief. If we'd met Yamato in a surface duel, one gunner's mate recalled decades later, it would have been murder. Our shells would have gutted her in minutes. I'm glad it never came to that. Sailors are sailors no matter the flag. The technology was proven. The capability was there. But history chose a different path. The age of the battleship ended not with a climatic surface duel, but with carrier aircraft, submarines, and ultimately atomic weapons. The perfect bullet arrived just as the gun became obsolete. After the war, the Mark 8 APC shell remained in service for decades. Iowa-class battleships were repeatedly mothballed and recommissioned, serving in Korea, Vietnam, and even the Gulf War in 1991. Each time they returned to service, Mark 8 ammunition remained part of their loadout, though increasingly obsolete in an era of guided missiles and precision strikes. The last time a Mark 8 shell was fired in anger was during shore bombardment in the Korean War. The last time one was fired at all was in a training exercise in the 1,980 seconds when USS New Jersey, recommissioned under President Reagan, conducted live fire drills off the California coast. Old ammunition, old guns, old doctrine, a ghost from another age. When the Iowa-class battleships were finally decommissioned for the last time in the 1,990 seconds, museums across America inherited their legacy. Today you can visit USS Iowa in Los Angeles, USS New Jersey and Camden, USS Missouri in Pearl Harbor, and USS Wisconsin in Norfolk. On each ship, in the magazine's deep below deck, a few Mark 8 shells remain on display, inert painted, labeled with technical specifications that mean little to most visitors. But naval engineers know what they're looking at. Those shells represent a brief, brilliant moment when material science defeated armor, when intelligence won over mass. The legacy of the Mark 8 APC shell isn't just technical, it's philosophical. It proved that in warfare, as in life, the most powerful solution isn't always the biggest or loudest. Sometimes it's the smartest. The shell that could penetrate any armor was born from understanding failure, from dissecting what didn't work and imagining what could. Today, modern naval warfare has moved so far beyond armor and shells that the Mark 8 seems almost quaint. Missiles travel hundreds of miles, guided by GPS and radar. Railguns under development promise to fire projectiles at hypersonic speeds using electromagnetic force. The battleship itself, that symbol of naval might for centuries, is extinct. Yet, every modern armor-piercing weapon, from tank shells to bunker busters, owes something to the principles perfected in that secret wartime laboratory. Delayed detonation, optimized metallurgy, physics over brute force. The engineers who created the Mark 8 weren't just winning a war. They were writing the textbook for every kinetic weapon that followed. In the silence of museums, those old shells wait. Monuments to an arms race that ended the moment it was won. If this story moved you, share it, so more people can discover the truths time almost erased. Every event, number, and character in this documentary has been verified through historical sources and declassified naval engineering documents. In the silence that followed, history took a deep breath and changed forever.